it's important to our American history. I think there's a lot of Americans that go like, why do we have a British ship here?
Yeah.
And I mean, right, it drives us both crazy when they do that. Hello everyone, and welcome to this first episode of the Queen's Cross podcast. I'm joined by my co-host Shiloh Svoboda. Say hello, Shiloh.
Hello everybody.
And this is a brand new podcast where we're going to talk basically all about the Cunard Queens, the Queen Mary, Queen Elizabeth, maybe a few other ones like the QE2, and stuff. But I think eventually what we're going to do is we're going to have guest speakers on and we'll be interviewing them and stuff. We'll have different topics and things. So this show will be split up into different segments, and it'll begin with an intro, and then we'll do a quick trivia game, and then we will have the main topic, which today would be the Queen Mary and what it means to us and how we came to know about the ship. And so so shall we get into the trivia questions just to get us kind of situated and
So.
Get the creative juices flowing?
I think so.
Would you like to ask your trivia question first, or?
Sure. So, what year and month, possibly, if you know, did Cunard White Star dissolve? Well, not dissolve, but Cunard pretty much bought out White Star, so it became just Cunard Line again.
I know the year. The year was 1933.
No. That's when Cunard White Star became Cunard White Star. I mean, when did Cunard White Star pretty much end?
Oh, when did Cunard White Star end? That was 1949.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember the month.
Month? All right, well, it was December.
It was December? Okay.
This month. And then the second question is, do you know what company manufactured most of, if not all of the clocks on board the Queen Mary?
Oh, man. What company manufactured most of, if not all the clocks on the Queen Mary? I don't know.
Mercer.
Oh, dang it. I knew. I was like, it starts with an M.
I was going to say, I know you know it, but it's like, when it comes back to having to answer the question, you always...
I was like, I don't think I'm ever going to get this, Okay. Mercer, okay. Which I actually really like Mercer clocks.
Me too.
Okay, so I shall give you my trivia questions for today, and I'll send you the first one here, so that way, because it's multiple choice, so you're going to want to see it. So the question is, what distinctive feature sets Queen Mary apart from other Cunard-built liners? A, her cruiser stern, B, her well deck, or C, her quadruple screws?
Well, this is kind of there's kind of two answers to this, but I'm going to say the well deck.
That's good. Yes, that is the answer to this particular question. What was your other answer?
I was going to say the cruiser stern because that was kind of revolutionary with the Queen Mary. I mean, other ships had it, but that was the first ship, I think, because the Queen Mary was the largest ship in the world competing with the Normandy. That since that was the largest ship in the world at the time, that was, the design was the cruiser stern. So then most of the other ships followed after that. Mauretania 2 had a cruiser stern. Queen Elizabeth had a cruiser stern, and so on.
That's true. Yeah, the question was pointed at like all Cunard built liners. So that's definitely one of them. So you answered correctly. Was her well deck is what set her apart, because Mauretania had quadruple screws as well as Lusitania,
right?
And then like you said, the ships coming after Queen Mary had cruiser sterns as well. So all right, so the second trivia question I have for you is, what was the name of the crew exclusive bar aboard the two Cunard Queens? Was it A, the Fox and Whistle, B, the Pig and Fife, or C, the pig and whistle.
It's going to be C, the pig and whistle.
Is that your final answer?
That's my final answer.
All right, you got that correct.
Good.
It is the pig and whistle. Oh, that was interesting. The first one, A, the Fox and Whistle, is the name of a pub in the show Frasier.
Yeah, I say it sounds familiar. Yeah. It doesn't sound made up.
It's one of my favorite jokes because Daphne brings Frasier in and she says, "Say hello to the Fox and Whistle." And he says, "Well, point her out and I will."
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Well, anyway, so for people that are wondering, if I'm looking up at like the corners of my screen, it's because I have this huge TV as my computer monitor, and Shiloh is all the way up in this corner, and my software is all the way up in this corner. So I will be googly eyes for this show, but occasionally I will look into the camera. So I suppose now we get into the main meat of the podcast today. And so, well, actually first let's talk a little bit about like the podcast. Like, you know, when I was first making this channel and well, when I was first making Queen Mary content, I mean, I had originally wanted to create a bunch of documentaries and things, but as I was doing that, I was kind of thinking, you know, it'd be really great to do like a podcast that is entirely just about the Queen Mary, or at least about the Cunard Queens or something, because that's really where most of my passion for ships lies, is with the Queen Mary. I think, as I'll probably talk about a little bit later, I'm not that much of an ocean liner fanatic. It's really just the Queen Mary that captured my imagination and my attention. But I do know that for a long time, Shiloh, that you've also wanted to be a part of a podcast or something to kind of discuss your interest in the ships as well.
Yeah, some kind of like a panel, you know, for Queen Mary and related subjects.
Yeah, I mean, there isn't much opportunity for people to really discuss the ship online. I mean, there's videos and things, but that's not a discussion, you know? And there's forums and stuff, but then forums, they get old and, you know, you can't really...
And a lot of them have been around a while.
Yeah, exactly. They've been around a while. So I think, you know, as soon as I had seen an opportunity to do a podcast, I was like, you know what? Let's do it. You know, I know enough about the ship now that I could keep up with information. And, you know, Shiloh has been my teacher, my sensei about all things Queen Mary ever since I met him. So, you know, I thought, what better than to, you know, create a podcast with you and discuss the ships, you know?
And I think it's also a good thing because it's something new to try, you know? We have...
Yes.
Yeah.
I was nervous about it because I knew that for a podcast, we might have to interview people and stuff. And I think what a lot of people don't really know about me is I don't like interviewing people. I mean, it's odd enough. I mean, right? Like, I talk about history and stuff. You'd think like I would love to interview people, but wherever I can, I avoid it. Because I think I just get nervous or something. I don't know. But for this podcast, I thought, well, you know, this isn't so much an interview as like a laid back conversation. Yeah. And I think that's why I was like, you know what, let's do this, because, you know, it's not something that I don't feel nervous. You know, like if I had some big names that are in the Queen Mary community here on this podcast, I don't think I would feel that nervous just having a casual conversation about the ship with them. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So let me ask you, Shiloh, what was your first memories of the Queen Mary?
I can't remember the exact year right now, but it was a while ago. It was in the probably 2013 or so. And some of my family members took me to the ship, and at that time they had their ghost tours going on. I can't remember the exact one it was, but they had all the effects. So when you go down to the watertight door, that big television you see up there, that was working. You go in the boiler rooms, the big televisions they have down there, they were working. So the tour was, very functional back then. And I remember that. So I don't remember so much of me actually seeing the ship, as I'm crossing over the bridge to the pier, as I would now. I don't remember so much stepping foot, for the first time on board the ship. But what I do remember at the time is because of the tour, I was very scared of the ship. And it's very ironic because at that time I didn't want to go back, because that's the people who brought me kind of made it that way, which is unfortunate. But my mom asked me like maybe a few months after that, like, you went to the Queen Mary, right? This was a long, long time ago. And she goes, and I said, yeah. So she said, maybe we should go back someday. And I'm like, I don't know about that because of my memories I had, I was rather scared of it. So, I think it was maybe 2015 or 16 or so. I went back again with my mother. And that's when it clicked. Something in that trip clicked. And it went from the complete opposite of me being scared, not wanting to see the ship anymore, to just completely being drawn to it. And I remember I would be sitting in school, and I'd be like daydreaming, like, can I go back? Can I go back? It was every day. And then I finally did go back. And then that was like one of the best days of my life. But now every day that I go on board the Queen Mary is the best day of my life. But, so yeah, that's how it started really. So it was very ironic. I went from absolutely being terrified of it to, loving it.
And like, was that around the same time you kind of really became obsessed with like the 1930s aesthetic? And
that's kind of interesting because that's, people always ask me like, when did that start? And that's something I can't really answer because it's kind of something that's been with me all the time. Even when I was very little, I knew I liked old things. I just didn't know what. I didn't know what era. I just knew I liked it. And I knew like this interest I've had has always been in me, but I didn't get to see what aspects of it I truly, felt like I was a part of until later when I learned about it. So when I started learning about the 20s and 30s, I mean, probably in 5th grade or so. I mean, like I knew about it before, but I didn't actually look into it until that time, because before then I was like really interested in the 1860s, and I still am. But, the interest really took off around that time. That's when I started collecting records. People always ask me like, how long have you had these records? Because I have a bunch back here and I have a lot more over there.
You have a lot.
And I have a lot, yeah. And it started, people always ask me, like, when did you start that? And I would have to say I started collecting records in like 3rd grade. So,
wow.
Yeah.
I had always assumed that your love of the Queen Mary and your love of like, the older, early 20th century aesthetic was like went hand in hand. I had no idea that you're
and that's just, I find that so fascinating. It's, it's because it's not like I just became infatuated with the ship, because, I got hyper fixated on it. It's just because like I've always been interested in this time period. And now that there's a vessel that I love equally as much, it's just an added benefit that it's from the 20s, not 20s, but 30s and 40s and 50s, so it really just fits together perfectly. So that's probably one of the reasons I love the ship so much, is because of those two different worlds coming together unintentionally, really.
Yeah. I mean, I would say something similar for me as well. All my life, I've kind of been somewhat interested in the Art Deco look and then the way that people used to dress back in the 1930s. And even as I grew up, my choice of like certain clothing and things, I always, like, for instance, like I was always obsessed with like Oxford style shoes. And I didn't even realize until like, just a few years ago that was like a primary style of shoe for men in the 1930s. And so like I've always had this interest, and stuff, especially in Art Deco architecture. I would say my earliest memory of the Queen Mary was walking along the sun deck with my dad around sunset, but facing the land side, the port
pier?
side. Yeah. So, because I remember walking down the sun deck, and I remember there was all these blue awnings on the windows and things.
I think they were on the lifeboats.
And the lifeboat, yeah. Well, I mean, like, like for door entries and things.
Oh,
There were
yeah.
like blue awnings and stuff because that was like still the remaining aesthetics of the Disney era. But yeah, there was blue tarps, well, not tarps, but canvas over the lifeboats as well. But yeah, I remember walking along the sun deck with my dad. I was very, very young. I must have been 6 or 7. And what would you say is like, I mean, with the Queen Mary, would you also say that was your first interest in ships? That's what got you interested?
Because like you said, the typical answer would be Titanic. And that was certainly an interest of mine a long time ago. I mean, I'm still interested by the Titanic, but that was, my primary focus a while ago. But I wouldn't say that was my first start. It's because, here in San Diego, we have all the ships in the port and the harbor. And I used to go, I still do, but I used to go often down there to look at the ships. And I think that is what interested me in the ships. Because we have the naval base here, we have all the tall ships, we have the museum, we have the Berkeley. Those ships, I think, are probably what interests me the most. And, once I knew that we had the Queen Mary just a few hours up, I would go to the museum ships here and I would think, well, this is my equivalent of the Queen Mary. So in the meantime, when I can't go to the Queen Mary, I can go here, and I became interested in those ships. But, it's just that era of ship, like especially the Berkeley, because all the other ships there are like sailing ships and tall ships, like the Star of India. Then there's naval ships like the Russian submarine is gone now, but we have the Dolphin, which was an American sub. So we have those ships, but the only, vessel that's really from that era would be the Berkeley. So I would say probably the Berkeley was what started everything.
Yeah. And, and to continue on with my story, like, I would say my obsession with the Queen Mary really didn't begin until my last visit in January of 2020. My friend Chris and my friend Steve, I call him Disney Steve because he's the Steve I met at Disneyland, and they had wanted to hang out. We were thinking, where should we go? Should we go somewhere with train? Because we're all train fans. And so we're like, well, where should we go? And Chris was the one that was like, well, why don't we go to the Queen Mary? The tickets are, affordable or whatever. And, we can go there and spend the whole day or whatnot. And I thought, oh, the Queen Mary's okay. But I mean, I guess if we can't find anything else, and he was just like, no, let's go. It was really weird because he's never that passionate about anything. Yeah. So it was really weird that day because he was just like, no, let's just go. Like, it feels like a good day to go to the Queen Mary. We were there on a Saturday and there wasn't even like the restaurants open. It was just, and my friend Chris, one of the things he wanted to do was he wanted us to have dinner at Sir Winston's, and Sir Winston's wasn't even open on a Saturday.
Yeah.
So the ship was just in a really bad state, and it felt like almost like this tugging to help the ship in some way. And I didn't know how. I just had a YouTube channel, and eventually, I got into wanting to make videos about the ship. And actually that's where Shiloh and I had met each other, actually, was on the ship, because I was looking for the Lego Queen Mary exhibit. There, it's a long 27-foot long model of the Queen Mary done in Lego, and I couldn't find it for the life of me, even though I was like 10 feet away from it. And when my friends and I were sitting in Promenade Cafe restaurant, or was it? No, it was Chelsea's.
Chelsea, yeah.
It was an empty restaurant. Chelsea's was empty, and they had just opened for lunch, and so they sat us down at this table, and then all of a sudden, here comes this guy, and his mom, and they seat us down. Well, they sit them down next to us out of this whole empty restaurant.
Yeah.
And I had seen you around earlier that day because you were unmistakably dressed as a ship's officer.
Yeah.
And so I was like, you know what? If anybody knows where this Lego exhibit is, it'd be this guy. And so I remember asking you directions and stuff, and we had like a very brief, pleasant encounter. And so I was like, oh, that's really cool, but yeah, when I eventually, like months later, was like, okay, I want to start making videos about this ship, it was like magic. All of a sudden, you appeared in the comment section of my vlog about the Queen Mary and was like, hey, I think you said that you had met me on the ship or something, and you had offered, to help me out with any like research or whatever. I was like, I remember being like, oh, okay, well, I don't know, because I didn't know who you were, so like, I don't know, but like just like a week later, I was like, yeah, I need his help.
Because I still do it too, but back then I was like every other day I would check YouTube for the newly uploaded videos on Queen Mary to see what there is. And I was expecting, because I saw you were filming, so I was like, okay, well, I'm sure his video will come up and I'll see, what he was filming about. And eventually, sure enough, I found the video, I found your channel, and I'm like, okay, that's the guy. So that's why I left the comment.
So what would you say would be the most important aspect, the most important legacy the ship leaves behind?
I mean, apart from, helping us win the war, just being the first in many innovations, lifeboat davits that, all the ships today use the same technology, the gravity davits that Queen Mary has. Besides from all those innovations that Queen Mary was the first, and now we copied or actually built upon those designs and now have, safer vessels. Apart from all that, I think probably the most important is, like you said, bringing people together. There's a lot of people in the United States right now that are, second, third generation, and they can track their roots from their ancestors being brought from, England, Europe, mainland Europe, France, Germany, Denmark, being brought to the United States from the Queen Mary. And a lot of them say that, if it hadn't been for the Queen Mary, they wouldn't exist, which is true, because they wouldn't be in the United States. Their family wouldn't have came here and made a life. And I think even the Queen Mary being stationary in Long Beach, that doesn't mean anything. I think, if anything, she's brought even more people together, where she is in Long Beach. Yeah, so just the sheer amount of importance that the Queen Mary is to the human race is very important.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say, for me, first and foremost, the legacy of the Queen Mary, the most important aspect is her war service. One of those little known stories that I had learned about the Queen Mary that I think a lot of people really just don't know is that the Queen Mary had basically helped to win the first battle at El Alamein, because that, I think it was either June or July, I don't remember what month that of 1942 it was, but she had been carrying troops from Great Britain, and they could have been American, they could have been British, because the ship was, during that time, was doing routes to and from the United States and bringing troops over to the military hub in Scotland. And so she was carrying troops to the Mediterranean, and it was because they had heard that the British 8th Army over by El Alamein was being pushed against the coast, and they were about to lose. And so the Queen Mary had to pass through was it the Strait of Gibraltar, I want to say? Is it?
Yes. Well, from North Africa to Spain and...
Yeah. That's Gibraltar, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I was doubting myself. I'm like, did I get the name right? Anyway, she had to pass through that, which, according to the book I read, was like an enemy stronghold, but some people say, oh no, that wasn't. That was like a, whatever. I don't know. Allies were there. I don't know. But anyway, she had to pass through that and then go into the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean was festering with all kinds of air and watercraft that belonged to the Axis forces, and the ship
mines
and mines. I mean, it was a dangerous place to go. They just didn't send ships into the Mediterranean unless they were warships,
Mm-hmm.
But the ship came into the Mediterranean and dropped troops off a distance from El Alamein, but dropped them off. About 10,000 troops and supplies were dropped off, and that helped the Allies to push back against Erwin Rommel and his Afrika Korps. So, and yeah, that won the first battle. And so that's one of those things that not a lot of people know about, and it's not really written about in a lot of history texts when they talk about El Alamein. And I think also that it's important to our American history. I think there's a lot of Americans that go like, why do we have a British ship here?
Yeah.
And I mean, right, it drives us both crazy when they do that, when they say that, because they don't know. They don't know the importance of the ship to our American history.
It's just as much American as it is British, you know?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I mean, there's even stories about when the ship first went into service in the 1930s that the Americans pretty much considered it their ship too. You know, they fell in love with it, and sorry to say, they loved it more than Normandy.
yeah. They said that a lot of passengers and a lot of crew said that. Well, and you know, people on the pier in New York said that the welcome that Queen Mary got was probably the greatest welcome any ship has ever gotten in that harbor.
Yeah. Not to mention, the Queen Mary's also had the greatest send-off of any ship, any merchant vessel ever. Especially the welcome into Long Beach Harbor.
Oh, yeah.
5,000 vessels showed up to that, and, you know, including the U.S. Navy and stuff like that. I mean, it's just...
minesweepers and,
Yeah. I mean, no one has ever seen anything like that, you know, before or after. And that's just an incredible legacy to leave behind. So, yeah, I mean, that is what I think is the legacy of the Queen Mary. But what would you say, like, what are some things you hope that people, like, let's say there's people that are going to the Queen Mary for the first time. What are some takeaways you want them to take away with?
To leave
like,
with, yeah.
Yeah, like some things to appreciate.
I think certainly, like you mentioned, the war service, because, I mean, you know, even when I go into museums, like I was expecting in New Orleans in the World War II museum to see some kind of mention of Queen Mary, because she really was a big part of the war, and there was no mention. So to understand that the Queen Mary is, you know, was the reason that we won the war, pretty much, you know, on top of the fact of, like I mentioned, the sheer amount of people in the United States and around the world that can, you know, track their family history from, you know, coming to that part of the world because of the Queen Mary, or, you know, the Jews that escaped Europe during the 30s, you know, the Queen Mary saved their lives. So just, you know, the humanity aspect, I guess you could say, of the ship, you know, is very great, and it's still present to this day. So I think that, and I mean, even if you want to get into the technical stuff, you know, the ability that we have today to have safe vessels, you know, that all stems from the Queen Mary. All that technology was pretty much tested on the Queen, not tested, but it was the first.
Right, because like people often credit Titanic for that stuff. Like, oh, the Titanic, you know, was you know, is credited for the safety changes and stuff. It's like, well, the Titanic is the reason why they decided to make changes.
Yeah.
But those developments were all tested on the Queen Mary. The Queen Mary was the first ship to have a full fleet of motorized lifeboats with engines that could be started even in the most freezing cold weather that a car could not start in.
Yeah.
You know,
just,
and then
just the technology of the davit itself is something we still use to this day.
Yeah, the gravity, you know, they could be lowered with a motor, but if there was no power, they could be lowered by gravity, which was a big deal because, you know, it you know, back in the day, it would have been difficult to do such a thing.
Yeah.
You know, there were so many safety technologies developed for the Queen Mary. I mean, even the fireproofing of the ship done with specialized. They developed their own type of plywood to use on the bulkheads of the Queen Mary, called turn-all plywood. It was made with sandwiched layers of asbestos to help prevent the spread of a fire, or to at least slow it down.
And funnily enough, it's still safe. It's still very safe,
It is. Yeah, it is. I mean, even all the original fire doors are in place.
Yeah.
It's
they're still being used. You go in the hotel corridors and you look at the doors and you say, this looks new because they just painted it. Still got a skeleton keyhole. You can still see the original paint, like in the indent. Like it's original. It's still being used.
The Queen Mary is one of those kinds of places that I think is really important. Well, I say place, but it's a ship. But I mean, it's one of those kinds of things that we need to preserve and actively try to teach people about. I mean, there's so many things that the ship can offer in terms of education, not just architecture and design, but also engineering, history in terms of the war, history in terms of how people lived, history in terms of how people treated each other. I mean, Queen Mary,
the human interaction aspect too. You can learn a lot from that.
I mean, the Queen Mary was there was like this on a lot of British ships, but there was no segregation on the Queen Mary.
Yeah.
In the United States, segregation was a big issue in the 1930s.
Which is why, a lot of passengers, famous passengers from America, preferred the Queen Mary or other Cunard ships.
Yeah, I believe on American ships back then, they were segregated.
Yeah, which is why they chose British ships.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there's so much more that can be said about the Queen Mary, but we must begin to wrap up this podcast.
I was going to add one more thing to that.
Sure.
Something to take away, and also that qualifies as an eighth wonder of the world, is that the fact that, especially like in the observation bar and other places on the ship, the woods that are used are extinct. The only place really they exist is on the Queen Mary. So, something to take away is that, a very rare wood that's extinct, and it's here, and to qualify as a wonder of the world, same thing, extinct wood, and it's still here, still doing what it was built to do, so.
Yep, I agree. I mean, even in the observation bar, it's known that there's a single tree had given its wood to panel the walls of the observation bar, and it is a type of cedar mahogany. And even though you can still get cedar mahogany wood to this day, you'll never find anything quite like it.
No.
On the Queen Mary, because that one, they found a very special tree. It was extremely old, and it had a very special type of wood grain to it due to its age and its other physical features. And there is no cedar mahogany that looks anything as beautiful as the one in the observation bar. And it was just one tree. And so it's things like that you can't find anywhere else.
And the tree's not gone; it's still there. You can still admire the wood; it's still there.
Yep. It hasn't decayed in a forest or something like that.
No,
it's there on the ship.
Yeah, and if anything, that's probably the best thing that happened to it, because it's constantly treated and preserved. So, it's going to be in the best condition it can be.
And I believe recently the panels in that room have been cleaned.
Yeah,
so.
They've been brightened. Definitely been brightened. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can actually see the sections now that they took the TVs out. So.
I like that too, that they took the TVs out. Oh, that's something that I think we should probably touch on quickly, is how much we love what they're doing at the Queen Mary right now. Because the new management at the ship have really stepped up their game in comparison to previous management teams. There's so much refurbishment and restoration going on. I mean, alone we've seen a lot of, well, first of all, like carpet changes in the corridors. We've seen them replace a lot of the fluorescent lighting with a more warm white LED lighting that more closely matches incandescent. We've seen them redo teak decking on the outside of the ship, as well as restoring teak decking on the indoor sheltered promenade. We've seen them do so much stuff. They recently had had reintroduced I should say they introduced a replica Royal Standard. Her Majesty Queen Mary's Royal Standard was replicated and put back in the main hall where it belonged. I mean, they've done so much stuff, and they're, making partnerships with people to get those kinds of things done. I mean, we know that upcoming is a refurbishment to the art piece, Unicorns in Battle.
Yeah.
That will be restored, it is in dire need of that. So, we really love what's going on with the Queen Mary. There's a lot of positive things. There's even things we can't even talk about that we know is coming to the ship. Yeah. And it's really exciting stuff, you guys.
Not to mention the events they're hosting on there, like the Alex Mendham events, the period events that are coming.
I mean, the ship is doing really, really great right now, and that cannot be understated. That it's a remarkable achievement, because that's something that a lot of previous management teams over the last 3 decades have struggled to do. Mm-hmm. And some management teams didn't even try. So this team is really great. And, I've had email exchanges with General Manager Steve Koloka. I've spoken to people at the city of Long Beach who are in charge of the ship. And, there's a lot of excitement going around. The people that are currently in charge of the Queen Mary really, really care about the ship.
And me as well. I've actually, I've spoken to Steve Koloka and then, management, and like you said, they really care about what they're doing. They understand what they have.
So I had, before we end this podcast, I forgot that I had a trivia question for the audience. So you guys can answer this trivia question in the comments down below. But for my viewers, true or false, the Cunard liner QE2 is named after Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. So true or false, the QE2 is named after Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Anyway, folks, after I've gotten a few of those responses in the comments, I will post a pinned comment at the top of the comment section that has the answer. So anyway, folks, I think that'll do it for this episode. In the coming episodes, we will do interviews with other people and stuff, and bring in other ocean liner fans as well as influential ocean liner people and historians and things. And this will be an interesting show going forward. So anyway, folks, if you enjoyed this podcast, leave us a comment, a like, and also subscribe to the channel for more, as well as the fact that if you'd like to learn more about the RMS Queen Mary, Shiloh and I do run a website called rmsQMwiki. The link is in the description below. It is an online encyclopedia all about the Queen Mary. It is still under construction. It probably will be for its entire lifetime, but there is a lot of information on there already about the Queen Mary. We do suggest you visit it, and we have a Facebook page that is associated with it as well. That Facebook page is also called RMS QM Wiki. So thank you guys for watching. Bye-bye.